Hi, and welcome to the Grind Academy podcast. My name is Rob Patterson, and I'm a former CEO who traded the comfort of that life in to become an entrepreneur. The Grind Academy podcast has one main purpose: to be a platform for sharing experiences and practical life skills not taught at school. Growing up, my parents chose to serve their lives as youth missionaries. This meant relocating several times and having to repeatedly find my place in new towns. I often faced difficult situations at home from troubled youths, and I struggled to fit in at new schools. My academic grades suffered, and despite securing a place at hotel school, I struggled to focus and eventually dropped out. Still, I made it to a high-profile CEO role for one of Great Britain's largest hotel chains, and today I own several successful businesses. It was practical life skills, big dreams, and hard grind that guided me on my journey. That's why each week I'm introducing some of the most inspiring and talented minds from sport, business, literature, and science. I want to share their stories as practical life lessons you can learn from and apply to your own personal situation. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Now let's meet today's special guest. Today I'm joined all the way from LA by Myriam Glez. I was pretty excited to record episode 8, partly because Myriam is a dual Olympian in synchronised swimming, now known as artistic swimming, but also we happen to have been colleagues back in the early 2000s. We both worked for Accor hotels in Australia during the same time, and although I didn't have a lot to do with Myriam, I was always aware of her presence because there weren't too many double Olympians working at the company. Myriam competed in the Sydney Olympics in 2000 for France and the Beijing Olympics in 2008 for Australia. There's a pretty defining reason Myriam didn't compete at the Athens Olympics in 2004, which she shares in the podcast. There's also an incredible sliding door moment on December 26, 2004. A story that, if it was any different, would have been life-altering, perhaps life-ending. You have to hear that story. Following her professional athletic career, Myriam went on to hold various national leadership and coaching roles for the Great Britain Olympic team. After the 2012 British Summer Olympics, Myriam and her family moved to New York, where she took up the role of Synchro High Performance Director for Team USA. In 2015, Myriam was appointed CEO at Synchro Swimming USA, restructuring the organisation for a stable future. Today, Myriam is the founder of Soul Athletes, an organisation created to support retiring athletes with educational resources, career coaching, and network opportunities. Myriam's story is one of resilience, hard work, and perhaps a series of unexpected occurrences, both good and bad. It's Myriam's ability to make good of all those situations that offers the greatest lesson in this podcast. I hope you like this episode, and if you do, please share it with your friends and share it on social media. Don't forget to tag us in at grind.equity. So without further ado, let's meet Myriam. So welcome, Myriam Glez. So pleased to have you on the Grind Academy. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to reconnect.
It is. Well, we worked together at Accor a number of years ago, and I was pretty excited about this one because, you know, to have a dual Olympian on the program is a pretty big deal. But then when I started researching and seeing everything that you've done after being an Olympian yourself, I'm pumped for this conversation today. So let's dive right in. But starting with the synchronized swimming, I wanted to find out first, is it synchronized swimming or artistic swimming?
So that's a good one. It's up to you, really. The sport was named synchronized swimming for the last 30 to 40 years. And then the name was changed 2 years ago before the Tokyo Olympics to artistic swimming to reflect more of its similarity with artistic gymnastic. But a lot of the athletes still call it synchronized swimming and mostly synchro for short. So you can use either one.
Synchro. What do you prefer? What do you use?
I always refer to synchro because when I competed, that's what it was. I never competed under the artistic swimming banner.
Okay, got it. All right. So I'm interested to know, it's not really a sport that I saw at high school or growing up, other than the Olympics. How did you get into it?
Yeah, and it's good that you're pointing this out because for me, growing up in France, it was actually on TV.
Mhm.
So it's a much bigger profile sport than in America or in Australia. So I saw European Championship, I think in the 80s, and it was a real revelation. And from that day, I told my mom, okay, this is what I want to do. And I was pretty clear straight away. I was really passionate about water and swimming, even though I wasn't in any swimming lesson like you would be in Australia growing up, for example. I didn't take swimming lesson. I wasn't in a team. I just saw it on TV and decided that's what I wanted to do.
And was there a hero or someone you looked up to?
So the lady at the time, the French lady, Myriam Glez, was pretty prominent in the sport. She was on the European podium and the World Championship podium. So I think she was definitely the inspiration for me. After that, I don't know if I had a specific person that I looked up to. I think she was just the starting point, really.
Yes. And how old were you when you saw that and said, this is what I want to do?
I believe I was like 5 or 6.
Wow.
And it took a few months of really me nagging my mom until she actually took me to the local club to try out. It was really early on.
It is. And you say you had that's the moment you knew from the outset. What made you so sure that was what you wanted to do?
Seriously, I have no idea. I don't know. Looking back at it, it's a very niche sport. It's not something I had ever tried. I didn't even really know what it meant and how it looked like outside of what I had seen on TV. So it's really hard to tell what was attracting to me. But I tried out and I just loved it. And really, really early on, probably maybe 2 or 3 years after I started training, I was very clear saying, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm really focused on it. And I mean, as early as 10 years old, I was telling people I'm going to the Olympics.
That's amazing. So do you practice visualization and imagining what's going to be in the future? Did you subconsciously do that, do you think?
I don't know if it was that clear at the time doing that, when you're such a young age. But one thing that I definitely did, and it's funny, I had a conversation with my kid recently about it. I was in this beginner group at 6 years old, and I would do everything that we were told to do. But then I would look at the group next to us, which was the competitive team, and I would just look at them and try everything they were doing in addition to what I was doing. And then at the end of the practice, I would show the coach, hey, this is what I've learned from the other group. And I think I did this for a year until the coach was like, okay, that's enough. We're going to move you to the competitive group because clearly you're not placed in the right spot. So I think early on, I may not have known, exactly what the endpoint looked like, but I had this desire of competing with those that were better.
So you ended up competing in both the duet and a team synchronized swimming. Is there typically, do someone specialize in a certain type of synchronized swimming?
So typically the best 2 athletes swim the duet and then the others swim the team. So like everybody, I started with the team and then eventually made my way to the duet at the senior level. When you compete for your club, though, so in the youth categories, if you're part of the top members, you are likely to compete in the duet and the solo as well. So I had experience with those events earlier on in the youth age group.
When was the first moment that you thought, you know what, I can really go all the way in this sport? Was there a time that you won a tournament or you went to the nationals in France? What was the moment that you said, this could be my career? I could really make a shot of this.
So I think I had a first moment where I realized, okay, I can make it to a pretty good level, which was my first national championship in the 12 and under category. So I was pretty young already. Still, I think I was ranked that year I didn't place anywhere in terms of finals or podium, but I placed first in my age. And so I realized, okay, everybody's moving up next year, and I'm going to be the first contender for the gold medal for that championship. So I think that was the first time I realized, okay, I did pretty good. And then the next year I won solo and duet in that age group, and I think we placed fourth in the team. And from now, after that, I started trying out for the youth national teams, which I made every year after that. And then I was on the podium at nationals, either spot and sometimes gold spot every year up until the Olympics. So once you start making your first national team, I think your path is pretty clear if you continue to progress and do the work. And then the second moment where, it became very real is at age 15, I was invited to join the National Training Center in Paris, which is the place where you need to be if you want to be on the team for the Olympics. It's not because you go to the training center that you're going to make the Olympics, but you have to be there if you want to make the team. So once you get invited, it's you can taste it. Yeah.
I bet. Now you're in the middle of high school at this time. Mm-hmm. How difficult was it to juggle your workload at school with your training?
So I was very fortunate that I always did really well at school, and I was always able to manage properly. I think there's a lot of time management and doing things ahead. When we were at the training center, they've organized things in a way where your schooling is actually on campus. So the teachers come to you at the training center, and you have your school in the morning and then practice before and after in the afternoon. I missed a lot of school, but was always able to catch up. And I think, mostly because I was, a great memory. I was pretty fortunate doing well at school. So it was okay. It became much harder when you pass high school and you have to manage college and business school. That was a different story.
Yeah, I bet. So did you have to move to Paris at quite a young age then for that program?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a pretty quick turnaround. I think got the invitation in July, and I had to be there, mid-August. So you've got to make up your mind pretty quickly. I don't think there was any question for me ever. I'm sure there were for my parents.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like, I got the letter, I'm going. They just had to get on with it.
And how was life adjusting to coming from Lyon into Paris and starting to adjust to city life?
So I think not much on the city side, because when you go to the training center, you're literally, your whole life is at the training center. So you don't see a lot of Paris, to be honest. And you're really focused on fitting everything in your schedule. I think my biggest adjustment was really for the training in terms of the number of hours, who I was training with. I came from a small club where I was always kind of the top athletes in the club. And we were training probably 2-3 hours a day. And I moved there and we were training 6-7 hours a day. So I think the change physically was pretty big. The adjustment to actually, being from the top athletes to, at the bottom and having to learn with people that are 10 years older than you and have been to the Olympics, and you have champions all around. I think that adjustment was more difficult. I didn't really have time to think about the fact that I was away and in the big city and,
Yeah. Did you have anyone you looked up to in there, or was it a little bit overwhelming when you first turned up as a young girl?
There was definitely one of the athletes, Virginie, who ended up eventually being my duet partner. She's been the best synchronized swimmer in the world to date. And she is 1 year older than me. When I went to the training center, she was already quite established in the senior team. She was the youngest, but the best one out of everybody, and was on her way to make her second Olympics. So she was definitely someone that I look up to, and was also intimidated by it, to be honest, because she was so far ahead of all of us in competing with the highest level internationally.
So in terms of the training, the adjustment you had to make when you went to the center in Paris, how difficult? Describe to us a typical day of training.
Typical day would be 2 or 3 trainings a day. So when I was in high school, we would have a few hours of school in the morning, 2-3 hours in the morning. Then we would go straight to practice after that for 2 hours. And then we would rush to lunch, go back to school for 2 hours, and then we had 3 or 4 hours of practice in the afternoon. So you had a day that stretched from 7 in the morning till 9 p.m. when you were back to your dorms and had to look at homework.
Yeah, that's a lot to fit in, I guess, as a young girl
Yep.
growing up. And then when you finished school and you went on to now study at business college, how did you manage the two at that time? Because now it steps up, right? The workload outside of the pool steps up.
So after high school, I did something that you can compare to like a bachelor degree before going to business school. Part of it was on campus, so that helped. That I didn't have to travel anywhere to do that. I also did it in 4 years instead of 3. So that was helpful to like spread it out, especially the Olympics were in the middle of these 4 years. So I had to take some time off in the middle. It became much more complicated when at the end of this, I actually applied for business school and I got accepted. And they were going to be quite flexible with my training, but actually my coaches and my federation asked me to choose. So we can dive into this if you want, but I had to choose between going to business school and attending my second Olympics. So I ended up leaving the sport and going to school.
Yeah, I was wondering what happened in 2004, but that was purely to focus on your college degree.
Yeah, so I finished the 2002 season, got accepted in business school, and then they said like either you go to business school or you prepare for the 2004 Olympics. I got into a top business school and I didn't want to miss the opportunity, so I ended up taking that and leaving the sport, which I thought would be like the end of my career. I never thought I would go back. So I put all of my energy into school. And that's actually when I started working with Accor. The second year at business school, you could do your next 3 years in an apprenticeship. So they had a program at Accor for athletes as they were preparing for the candidacy for Paris 2012 at the time. So I ended up joining the communication department and doing school and Accor at the same time.
Well, let's go. I want to dive into that because that's a big life change. But let's go back to 2000. And I was living in Sydney in 2000, and I was working at the Wentworth Hotel, which you know probably as the Sofitel now.
Yeah.
And it was probably for me one of the most exciting times of my life. It was such an amazing experience. But describe to us how it felt as an athlete coming to Australia. Had you been to Australia before?
So before the games, we came to Australia in March. I think the games were in September. So we came 6 months before you have to qualify as a country for the Olympics. So we came and did a training camp in Melbourne at the police academy, which was really awesome. And so we came for a month, trained there, and then came to Sydney for the qualification event. And then we went back and came back for the Olympics. So I had done one trip before the Olympics, and the first trip was fantastic. The second one was even better.
So, I mean, describe to us the feeling of performing at the Olympics in 2000, your first Olympics.
Yeah. And I think not only was my first Olympic, but also because synchronized swimming is such a niche sport. When you go to most competition, there is not a lot of public and spectators watching you, unless you go to Japan or Russia, where they're big fans of the sport. But I never really swum in full, gigantic pools and full stands, except when we were in Japan. And so that was incredible, just the sheer size of things and the audience, something you don't really get at all for us. So that was incredible, a little bit overwhelming, quite exciting.
Yeah.
The opening ceremony was amazing. And I think, we have to put this in context too, that Sydney, this was before 9/11. And I think it was still part of a different era of the Olympics where there was less security. It was much more friendly, especially in Australia, it was really friendly. People were really excited about sport. Like, you couldn't have a better mix to host it. So the experience was fantastic. It felt, and I can compare to Beijing in 2008, was way more security and not as free for the athlete as we were in Sydney. So yeah, Sydney was amazing. And so the biggest things for me were definitely the opening ceremony, being with all of the athletes and marching in the stadium. And again, because I come from a niche sport and I'm not used to being in a stadium like a soccer player or a track runner, the sound for me, like I just remember the sound and how overwhelming it was to when you enter the stadium. So that was incredible. And then the competition was really good. We had worked extremely hard for this event, and I felt very prepared, and I felt that I could have not done more. So there was some sort of like combination of like excitement and a little bit overwhelmed by the size of everything, but also, okay, I've done everything I could. I just need to like perform now, and that's it. There's nothing else I can throw out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting chills when you're talking about it now, because it was such a magical time. And the point you make about being before 2001, I think is probably a very valid point. I was in London for the London Olympics, as I think you were as well. And I think also the size of Sydney was quite small, so you felt it everywhere. Whereas you could get around London and actually, if you didn't
know exactly.
Yeah. So it was a very different experience there. So that sort of, that height and that elation and great feeling that you had in 2000 must have been a huge decision in 2002 to say, well, actually, I'm going to step away from the sport that I've known and loved since I was 5 years old. What was your process of thinking to say, I'm going to focus on business now?
So I think there were two things that happened at the same time. One, obviously, I worked really hard to get into that school, and to be honest, I was quite burnt out. So after the Olympics, I had reached my childhood goal, which was going to the Olympics. I didn't really do any type of work to kind of reflect and think about what was next and what was my next goal. So I let myself continue, but sort of drifting into it. The whole team stopped except me and the other athletes that I was looking up to, Virginie. So we ended up being the pair, and I got thrown into this new story with her, which was amazing. But I don't think I was quite prepared for it mentally. Like, I hadn't set a new goal. I was really excited about it, and I was working really hard, but I don't think my direction was as clear. Mm-hmm. However, the school direction was really clear. Like, I knew I was going to finish my degree, and then I was going to try out for business school, and then I was going to go to business school. So that path was very clear. So that was the situation I was in, and I worked really hard for it. So I think like having the two alongside, like being the top level athlete and being in college, that was also really difficult physically, and I was pretty burned out by the end of those 2 years. And then when the coaches said you have to choose whether you either dedicate your full self to preparing for Athens or you go to business school, but we're not going to allow you to do both. And so at that point, I think I was pretty upset that they made me choose. I always thought I could do both, and I still think I could have been able to do both. But because I was upset, I think I was like, you know what, screw you guys. I'm gonna go to school, and I don't want to miss that opportunity because none of the swimmers before had that opportunity, so I wanted to do that. So I was pretty disappointed about leaving the sport. I didn't need a physical break, I think. So it was pretty complex, decision and process, but at the time it felt right.
Well, it's funny you say that, because a lot of people that I've spoken to, even on this program, when they have a big goal and they reach their goal, it's like, what's next? So how important are goals for you today, even in your life post competition?
Yeah, I think having that vision of where you want to go is super important, because otherwise you let other events or other people or the environment sort of drive by default where you're going. And so, it was very clear up to the Olympics. This was my path. I knew exactly. And then I was always very clear with my education. And I think it would have been really beneficial for me to have set a clearer goal. I've reached that first threshold of going to the Olympics. Like, what's next then after this? How does that look like? And I did not set that, and I didn't have people around me to like reset with me, which is okay. That happens all the time. I think it was a great lesson. And I think it's the same in life. Like, how are you going to reach whatever that it is you want to reach if you actually don't know what it is that you want to reach, and then don't know what that path look like? Then you're just gonna let everything sort of
do you think the modern day coach today needs to think a little bit more and help their whoever they're mentoring set goals beyond that first level? Is that a job of a coach?
I don't know if it's necessary to set it up before you reach that goal, but definitely afterwards there needs to be some sort of reflection, resetting, what's next, because training at this level, it's a full life commitment. You have to enjoy the training and the lifestyle to be able to like be good at it and sustain it. And if you are unsure or don't really know what you're doing it for, I think it's just much more difficult to maintain the motivation. And I think you're likely to burn out because you don't really know what you're doing it for.
Yeah. Well, because the only reason I asked that is because I saw something that you posted recently about coaching, and I was interested to hear your philosophies on the modern day era of coaching. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that shortly. So in 2005, you moved out to the Southern Hemisphere to Australia. At that time, was it, or did you go via Bangkok?
I did Bangkok, then back to Paris, and then Australia.
Got it. And so what was the priorities in your life at that time?
So I spent 8 months in Bangkok. Actually left Phuket the day of the tsunami in 2004. And then I actually was traveling to New Zealand and then went back to Paris. At the time, I was working in the communication department at the headquarters in Paris. And so when I came back to work after living 8 months in Asia, we were basically dealing with the aftermath of the tsunami. And the whole department was sort of like helping on that. And for me, that it just hit too close to home because I had been living in Thailand. I had a lot of friends who actually got hit by the tsunami and like really had challenge with it. And so I think pretty quickly I thought I can't like stay in this environment. I need to graduate from school, but after that I want to go somewhere else. So I quickly like asked my manager if there were any opportunity overseas, and I had I think asked for Australia and Brazil at the time because these were the two biggest growing country for Accor.
Yeah, Sao Paulo
And
office. Yeah.
like a 6 month opportunity came up at the head office in Sydney. And so the manager came back to me and said, next week we have something for you, but it's next week in Australia. Okay, I mean, and so this was a 6 months contract. And when I get to Sydney, one of the team member actually moved to Brisbane and resigned. And so they offered me her position straight away. So I ended up going for like 6 months and then staying. And then they ended up 7 years.
Wow, yeah. I had no idea that you were in Phuket at that time. Did you get out before the tsunami hit?
Yeah, we were really lucky. I was supposed to vacation in Phuket with my family at the Christmas time period, and then my mother couldn't take her time off, so they ended up coming earlier, and we ended up leaving Phuket to visit New Zealand with one of my friends. So that morning we boarded the plane, and then we landed in New Zealand and saw like on TV what had happened, and it was like just so scary. And we had a lot of friends from the university in Bangkok that were in Phuket, and yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear. I mean, it must have been Christmas Eve, right? I mean, that's a sliding doors moment.
December 26th, 2004. I can't forget.
Boxing Day. I mean, that's a sliding doors moment, isn't it? That could have completely changed your life by that happening. Did that force you to sort of reevaluate things and say, hey, what's important now?
I mean, to be honest, I was already getting there. Coming from Paris and living in Bangkok for 6 months and 8 months and traveling around. So my best friend is her families are refugees from Cambodia. So we went and visited a lot of what her family went through and visited her family in Vietnam and Cambodia. And so I had a lot of reflection on my privilege growing up. And my privilege to be able to play a sport at a high level and not to have to worry about, politics and, financials and all of that. So for me, the whole experience was eye-opening. The last part, obviously, the roll of dice in life, you never know what happens. But I think the whole thing had opened my eyes, and going back to Paris was actually quite challenging for a time. Like I thought, what are we talking? What are we talking about? We're talking about things that are insignificant compared to, what other population are struggling with. So I needed a change of scenery.
and Australia was that change of scenery?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then how did you become Australian then? Because it was 2007 that you became Australian citizen?
Yeah.
Is that
I actually looked wanted to coach synchronized swimming outside of working with Accor. They didn't have a synchro club in Sydney at the time. I called the federation and they say, well, yeah, we don't have a club, but we do have our national championship coming up. If you would like to come and participate. And I thought, this is kind of silly. I haven't swum for 3 years, but you're in a new country, you don't know a lot of people. I wanted to grow kind of my social network, and I thought, okay, this is perfect. I'll just go to the national championship. I'll swim a little bit. There's not a lot of risk involved, but I'll meet a lot of people. And so I did that. Took a few days off. I traveled to Brisbane, did the national championship, ended up winning the solo competition. And I drove back home and went back to work on Monday morning. And then I got a phone call from the national coach who said, do you want to swim for Australia? And I thought, this is the biggest joke ever. No. And then I hung up the phone. And at the time, at the office, we were all in an open space and people were like, what was that about? What did they ask you? And so, I kind of shared. I remember Graham Wilson's office was right behind me. And they were like, are you kidding? You don't want to swim for Australia? This is awesome. This is your opportunity. You should totally do this. And so it's sort of planted the seed. And then I think it was a week later or something, the news that traveled in the office. And now I'm having a blank. Who was the the CEO before.
Simon, it was Michael. Was it Michael Eisenberg at the time?
No, so not Michael, the head guy who started Accor in Australia.
Oh, David Bafsky.
Mr. Bafsky.
Yeah.
And so he called me in his office.
Wow.
And said, hey, you know, I kind of heard the discussion, and if you want, we can support you and help you through the process. And so, yeah, I ended up applying for citizenship and getting it pretty quickly, and then starting training with the national team. And the company was really supportive. Like my hours were a little bit more flexible. I could go on training camps because the teams were training in Brisbane and Melbourne. So I had a lot of training camps where I needed to be away. And so they offered me the flexibility to be able to do that and still work. So that was amazing. Incredible opportunity.
Yeah, Australian sport is such a big deal in Australia. So that doesn't surprise me. Did I hear you say you drove to Brisbane?
Oh man, I rented a minivan, a camper van, and I drove from Sydney to Brisbane because I wanted to see the coast, and then competed and then drove back.
It's like 10 hours.
Yes.
20 hours of driving in a weekend. Well done. I hope someone else was with you to drive.
I think I went by myself at the time. I had no idea what I was getting into. Like, I didn't know anything about Australia.
That is huge. I mean, it's a nice drive, but you're probably in a weekend. You're probably not. You're not going to get to see much.
Nope.
Oh, brilliant. So then you ended up competing in Beijing. Was it both the duet and the team event?
Yep. I competed in duet and team event. So Australia, is much lower in ranking than France, which made it easier for me to get back, into the pool and training. To be honest, if I had tried to come back for the French national team after a 3 years hiatus, that would have been pretty hard. Yeah. And I was older, so it was rough to get back into the sport, and the sport had moved forward and was much more athletic and fast. But yeah, I competed in the duet and the team in Beijing.
So just going back a step, did you have to do the test to become Australian, like as in answering those historical? Do you know, I did that test. I'm Australian and I failed it. But I had to do the same in England, and I got all my English friends to do it, and they all failed it too. So I did it for the US. I actually, I thought this was good. I learned tons of stuff, and so that was interesting. And listen, when we went to the Olympics, they were like, they had posted the national anthem on my door to make sure I knew all the words, and like they were briefing me on Australian stuff. Like I needed to know my stuff and know the athletes and who had come before me. And I think that was great. It's important. Well, if I've done some research correctly, you finished in Beijing 7th, was it, for Australia? And I think that was the highest Australia had ever come. And is it still the highest Australia has ever come in the sport? I'm trying to remember what they placed in London. I would think they would have done the same in London, maybe 7th. And then they were probably 8th in Rio and in Tokyo. And, the little note here, so I ended up starting a club in Sydney eventually and coaching it. It still exists now, the Sydney Emeralds. And one of the athletes who started with me, actually 2 of them, Amy started in 2007, and she competed in both Rio and Tokyo for the Australian team, and then another one in Tokyo as well. How does that feel? That's a legacy that you've left behind that's still running today. It must feel pretty special.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And, for me, some of the best friends I have in Australia are linked to that club. I still feel, I'm not really in touch with them, and I feel pretty attached to it and these athletes and what they've been able to achieve. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And that was put together for somebody to go and train, but did you try to inspire people into the sport? Was that the purpose of the club, the Emerald Club?
So the club was one, for me to have a structure to train, and then to like start having more athlete training in the sport and having a presence in Sydney. I mean, if you consider that there were a club in Brisbane, Melbourne, there was no club in Sydney at the time. They used to be, and then they were not. And so we started that again. And I felt it was pretty important to give back and coach some other athlete in the sport and just not leave the city without anything. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, well, it's a great legacy to leave behind. You mentioned before about, Australia is probably not a recognised nation for synchronised swimming. Do you think that made it more difficult to compete on the international stage? People immediately don't recognise Australia as a synchronised swimming country?
It's not recognized necessarily as the top countries, but I think, Australia still presented a team at every championship, and they're very present. They've gone through every Olympics, in the last several Olympics in teams. So they've had a team every time. They have a team at the World Championship. They are making progress. They've been making progress at the junior level as well. I think maybe in the eyes of my former teammate, it was probably kind of like a step down from what I did before. But I didn't do it for this reason. I had a pretty kind of negative retirement in the first place when I had to choose between my sport and my academics, and I had, it didn't end up in my own terms. I think I had more to give. And so being able to get back to the sport through a completely different experience, I couldn't care less about the result. It was fantastic to swim with athletes that I didn't share the culture with as a kid. There was so much to learn from that group. The experience was it was really interesting, and I didn't do it for the same reason, and I wasn't in the same place in my life either. And for me, what I saw it all as a bonus, I can get back to the sport I love, and make the most of it every single minute of it. So that was like a choice then to, you really choose to be there rather than doing what you've been doing all your life.
Feel that closure?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question about the ranking is that I think I read something that the coach at the time felt that actually you did better than 7th. You probably placed much higher than that, and that she felt the judges had marked you incorrectly.
Oh.
Did I read that correctly?
I don't know. I think we were probably in the right spot, to be honest. I don't think we would have done better. You have to put this in context, and that's something you learn pretty early on in synchronized swimming, which can be very frustrating at times. You have control over your performance, how you train, how you show up every day, what you put in. You have control on the performance of the day, and to be present in the moment and do that properly, and trust your teammates that they're going to do it as well. And once that's finished, you can't control anything else. It's a judge sport. There's a lot of things that means, and also, part of it is not just politics and bias that people think about straight away, but it's also cultural. Do the judges like your music? Do they like your style? Can they actually understand what you're trying to say? So there's an element of the sport that it's so subjective, that once you've done swimming, you just need to be happy with what you've done or what you've given, because after that you can't control it. So I was very pleased with all my result. We finished 4th in Sydney, and that was a progress from previous competition. It was the closest that we ever got to the podium, and it felt like a win at the time. Yeah. And I felt pretty good with our presentation in Beijing as well. So, you got to take what you like and move on with it.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about the training actually, because I imagine you're underwater a lot, you're upside down a lot, you're spinning around a lot. You need to hold your breath for long periods of time. What sort of training did you need to do to perfect the art?
So the underwater and breath holding is kind of part of the daily practice. So you'll do it in like swimming laps, swimming, practicing your routines. The training itself includes a lot of different things, and it's evolved over time, but you definitely do land work, like physical training, gymnastic, ballet, a lot of swimming laps. So all synchronized swimmers are incredible swimmers. And then we practice the routine and the technical parts in the water as well. And then now there's a lot of acrobatic training, and that's both in and outside of the pool too.
Yeah. So what does family mean to you? Just shifting gears a little bit. When did you start? Did you start your family in Australia?
I did.
Yeah.
So I met my husband in Australia. He's American, but we were both working in Australia at the time. And we had our daughter, who is 11 years old now, but she was born in Sydney. And I think for me, because we have lived overseas, I mean, I've basically lived overseas since I was, 22. I'm a long way from home. And so our unit of 3 is very close. And I think traveling all over the world together has put us even closer than perhaps if, I had married someone from France and was still living there. And I also feel much closer to my family now that I live overseas than when I was living in France. So, I have very strong bond with family, and it's definitely the priority, especially at this time in my life. That's definitely what I want to put forward and put time in. And my kid, she's in an age where, I'm driving her around to her sport and activities in school, and so I'll be present for that.
Does she want to follow in your footsteps?
She's definitely not a water baby. That's very clear. It's never been the case. She's super athletic. My husband actually played American football. So she's definitely has her explosive power, and so she does rock climbing and horse riding.
Nice. So she's born in Australia, and it wasn't long after that then you must have moved to Great Britain to coach the Great Britain.
Yeah, we moved when she was a year old.
Yeah. So and what took you to Great Britain to coach their team for their home Olympics?
We moved to the UK because of my husband's job. I wasn't quite sure what I would do in terms of work. I left our core, and I went to visit the synchro team in London because I had a contact through a friend in Australia, and I didn't go to get a job or anything. I wanted to see how they were training, and it's a small circle of people. We all know each other, and they ended up offering me a little bit of coaching, and so I thought, well, I don't have a job yet, I might as well start doing that. And then pretty quickly realized, okay, there's a lot of different things I can do. So I ended up coaching as an assistant with the Olympic team, but then I was coaching the younger team, the youth groups, and then doing a little bit of administrative work for the high performance director at the time. And it was really interesting because I had never thought of using my business school education to go back in sport. And for the first time I realized, and especially in the UK sport is really well organized on the high performance side, on the talent development. They have a lot of systems in place. I learned a ton when I was there, and realized, there is there is a place to bring your business skills into high performance management, and especially in a small sport where it's not structured, where there's no money, where the resources are very limited. None of that was available when I was an athlete. And so, for me, suddenly I was like, oh, wow, I can do this. This is great. So yeah, that's what I did when I was in England. And then when we moved to the US right after the London game, again, for my husband's job. And there was an opportunity that came up with USA Synchronized Swimming to lead the high performance. And so I took that position and stayed with the organization for 5 years.
It's a big responsibility to take on, like leading particularly a junior team, but also the Olympic team. What do you think makes a great coach?
A lot of things. It's, I think, a really, really difficult job. And they certainly don't get paid for the responsibility that they have, I feel. The ability, I think what makes a great coach is this ability to understand each individual and bring them to their best potential, and understand each individual's goals and make a pass to reach that goal and reach the goal of the team as well. It's very complicated. My definition of a great coach is perhaps very different now than when I was younger, where I thought, okay, the great coach is the person who has the best technical skills and can teach me, the best routine. Mm-hmm. And I think now that a great coach has nothing to do with that.
Well, you talked about your business skills. What business skills did you bring to coaching when you were in that role, or in those roles? You're in multiple roles.
I think a lot of long-term vision planning, just strategy work. So, what are the goals? How do we put together a plan to reach those goals? How do we set up a structure underneath the higher level to actually feed into the program? So it was mostly strategy and structure and organizational skills.
And I read somewhere that you did quite a big restructure in the US Synchronized Swimming Association when you were the CEO there. What sort of changes did you make to create, I guess, a foundation for the future there?
A lot of the changes related to when I was the high performance director, and it was creating a national training center where everybody would be regrouped and trained together, but also putting in place like support staff for that team, such as a PT, a doctor, a psychologist, a nutritionist, people that would work with the athlete aside from the coaches. We brought on board international coaches to train the team. Clear selection procedure to actually get on the team for every level of team. So not just that top level, but the younger age group as well. We put in place a talent identification program. So how do we, scout athletes from throughout the country and not just like a couple of locations? And what are the different skills that they have to go through and progress? So we did a lot of focus on land training. A lot of the training used to be just in the water, and we brought a lot of physical training to the practice. So there were quite a few elements to slowly change how things were organized.
So similar question to the coaching. What are the most important traits you think for a CEO today?
I think my answer is quite different now, a couple of years out, than when I was a CEO, I think. And I think that relates to probably one of the questions you'll ask me about what I have not learned at school. is that I think it's more important to inspire people with a pretty ambitious vision, especially in America, than being realistic about where you're at. No, and I think this is also something to learn from. And I learned part of this in Australia too. The French culture is very cut and dry. It's telling you like the way things are. Nobody wants to hear what's not the reality. But I think when you're the CEO, you have to inspire and have big goals, regardless of whether you can reach them or not, and make people believe so that they can move forward. They don't want to hear, where you're at. They want to hear where you're going to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you're now the founder and CEO of Athlete Soul. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Athlete Soul is a nonprofit organization that supports athletes as they transition away from sport. So we offer lots of different services to help athletes before, during, and after their retirement from sport. The idea is to help them develop beyond sport and prepare for athletic retirement, and then help guide them and facilitate their transition once they're retired. We kind of, this comes from the belief that as an athlete, an elite athlete, you're a high performer. You've already, contributed greatly with your efforts and training and competition to society. And, if you can find your next purpose and next passion, you can continue to inspire and contribute in your next life. And so, yeah, that's what we do. So we started this with a group of other athletes 3 years ago now.
What drove you to do this?
Partly my personal experience of having to choose, having a first retirement that was not necessarily voluntary, and then being able to go back and choose, and then have a voluntary retirement, compare the two, and realize how lucky I was in the second place. And also just observing either athletes that I've coached and how they struggle with their retirement, and athletes in other sport and how it's such a difficult time. And partly because I have been in sport, my whole life on different sides of the sport industry. And at the time when we started the organization, there was very few talk about athletic retirement and helping athletes once they were finished. There was very few services, and it was pretty disheartening to think like, and even as a CEO of an organization, it felt like all our efforts were on the competing athletes, and then you just had no contact with them afterwards, and they were sort of gone. Like it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel sustainable. And I think now people are starting to think differently about this.
Yeah.
And realize, we're dealing with people and not someone that you replace.
Well, I think so, more so now, because what an athlete has to go through now, there's so much structure that, like you said, there's nutritionists, there's psychologists, there's trainers. It's not just turning up and training for the day. It's a whole lifestyle, and almost every hour of the day is planned. To step out of that must be a really big adjustment, to go from knowing what you've got to do every single hour of every day to all of a sudden having to fend for yourself. So it's a wonderful cause. You've managed to turn, I guess, a negative situation for you into such a positive thing. And that's such a wonderful, must be very gratifying.
And I'm glad you're mentioning this, because also it's often all a matter of perspective. So when I made the decision to go to business school and left my sport, I felt it was the right decision for me, but I was also pretty devastated that I had to leave behind something else that I wanted to achieve. But in hindsight, this was the best decision I've ever made. I mean, all the incredible changes in my life happened after that. I ended up, living in Asia, going to school, moving to Australia with my job, meeting my husband. Like none of this would have happened if I had stayed and continued in my past. And so there is a lot of positive that can be made, like you said, out of a negative situation, and you just got to let yourself be open to these opportunities so that you can grab them. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it is. So what do you value today? What do you value most?
Time.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah, definitely time. And especially as my kid grow up, it's trying to figure out the balance between doing all the things I want to do, which is, continuing to work for Athlete Soul and some other project that I'm working on, having time for her, for my husband, but also to visit my family, to travel. I feel like, time is definitely the most valuable thing at the moment.
Sure. And I have to ask this one. I'm living in the US now, and one of the biggest things that I miss is a really good bread baguette. How are you coping?
I'm coping super well because I make my own bread. So
I've just started making my own as well. I bought all the equipment to make and I took the recipe from he won, I think it was 2018. He won the baguette of the year in Paris, and I took his recipe and method. It takes me like 24 hours.
I think you'll never go back. I do a simple bread, but I can't buy any more bread from the store anymore. Like it's just so easy, and it tastes so much better to make it your own.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's so sweet here. Actually, I had a loaf of bread last week here, and I looked at the packet, and
there's sugar in it.
Well, the sugar was scary, but it expires in May 2022. Like, how do they keep the bread good for 5 months? Anyway, we digress. So I got a couple more questions. First one is, what are, in the theme of the program, what are the 2 or 3 things that you didn't learn at school that you'd wish you'd been taught?
So definitely what I said before, which is, inspire people before anything else. I think a lot of it relates to people's skills. Be patient, and
you can do
kind of operate in the gray area. I think especially when you're an athlete, and especially when you're young and going to school, you always think everything is black and white, and I think business happens in the gray in every aspect of it.
That's a good one. Yeah.
So, being patient and operating in the gray area, and find your way to be inspiring instead of rejecting or judgmental.
Good answers. Good answers. I'm throwing my microphone away. All right. So, first, I want to say thank you for joining the program. I want to recognize a few things. The hours of training, the hard work you put in to compete both for France and for Australia, and then to coach for Great Britain and for the USA. I imagine it would take a lot of bravery and courage to get up and move across the globe several times, not just once. So I acknowledge you for that. And just for giving back to a sport that gave you so much. There's so much that you've done now that you're giving back. And even through Athlete Soul, it's such an important cause. The transition from professional athletes into a daily life is such the wisdom that you're passing on is such a fantastic thing. And just wanted to say thank you for doing that.
So nice. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me in this conversation. It's definitely been a while since we connected. So it's really interesting to chat and, connect with someone who has experienced the Accor story for sure. I like that you mentioned the bravery and the courage of moving to other countries. I think we are at a 6 stops now in different places. I'm definitely a professional mover, but you know, I think what goes with it is the fact that we've been open to opportunities, every opportunities that came up, and that it opened so much for us, so much learning and discovering new things. And that's probably the thing that I love the most is like when you get to a new place and you meet new people, you discover the culture, there's so much growth and learning that goes with it. It's not something you can replace with anything else. It's so scary the first time, and then eventually you kind of like embrace the fear of like, okay, I'm in a new place. It's really exciting.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. I think I'm not 6, but quite a few places as well. One last question then to wrap it up. If you had to identify one attribute that you had throughout your career and to leading to where you are today that you would want to pass on to your daughter, what would that be?
I think it's what I wake up with every day is like just the will to learn and kind of get excited about anything you can learn on the day. And she already does that. She loves to learn and try new things and work hard towards it. So yeah, just that.
Perfect. Well, she's got a great role model to look up to. And I just want to say thank you again for joining me on the show. It's been absolute pleasure to reconnect and chat with you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Rob.
Well, there you have it. What a positive mindset Myriam has. She's taken every situation life has dealt her and turned it into an opportunity. This is something most professional athletes have in common. They see opportunity, they're prepared for opportunities to come, and most important, they take action. That's what life is all about, recognizing opportunities presented to us every single day and taking action against them. When Myriam found out about the Nationals in Brisbane, Australia, she got in her car and drove 10 hours each way to compete, all in a weekend. See, that's what successful people do. They get in their car and drive 10 hours to give themselves a shot. The reward for Myriam was to gain the closure she so deserved. The closure for a career she had worked so hard at and pursued since she was a little girl. I want to thank Myriam for her contribution to the Grind Academy. I also want to thank her for being an example to her family and women all over the world that with a great attitude, hard work and perseverance, you can achieve anything. None of this information is anything you will learn in a textbook at school, and that's the point of the Grind Academy. I hope this episode was a practical benefit. If you like the podcast, let me know by posting and tagging me in on Instagram, grind.equity. Thank you for listening to the Grind Academy today. I want to wish you a fantastic week ahead. Remember, go out there with full intention, keep grinding, and never ever give up.